Welcome to my presentation about the value of motor testing as part of talent identification in table tennis. I will introduce you to some studies that we did in the Netherlands to develop a new motor assessment as part of talent identification in table tennis. But first I'd like to introduce myself. Hi, I'm Irene Faber. My background is being a physiotherapist and a movement scientist. And besides that, I've been a table tennis trainer for over 15 years. And these combined actually helped me to start my PhD project, which was about diamonds in the rough, searching for a high potential youth table tennis player, which I finished in 2016. Currently, I'm affiliated as a volunteer at the Sports Science and Medical Committee of the International Table Tennis Federation, at the board of the Dutch Table Tennis Association, and at the board of the Trainers Association of Table Tennis Trainers in the Netherlands. And my professional association is being a postdoc in talent and sports at the University of Oldenburg, which is located in Germany. To give you a small introduction of the team that I work with in Germany, this is the team with the professor leading is Jörg Schur, my direct colleague is Florian Luffing, and our PhD candidates are Til Koopman, Franziska Lat and Kimjana Huisman. Within my work, it is always about the question, who can be the new elites in future? And with that, how can we recognize diamonds in the rough? Although we have a selection for the European Youth Championships, many of them will not survive and will not keep up with the senior selections for the national teams. But there might be a couple of them having special abilities that will make it to the end. And of course, in addition to that, it's always important to think of the question how to guide these young kids to excellence. What is necessary to get the best out of the player and reach the full potential? And that started more or less with the mission of the Netherlands Table Tennis Association many years ago. And they said we want to have a structural increase of the number of professional players and performers at the top 10 of the world. But there's always a but in the story. As the Netherlands Table Tennis Association, we can only use the scarce financial resources once. So this was one of the citations of our chairman. And of course our director said, okay, if that's true, then we want to use the scarce financial resources for those athletes who run an appropriate program, perform nationally and demonstrate an international perspective. Which means that you actually need to select and that we cannot give every child the education that might be necessary. So then some questions raised. We need to think about what is actually talent, and is that the same as potential, and how do we map potential? How do we identify high potentials, and can we do this in a more objective way maybe? And what is the value of testing within that? So I tried to discuss with you answer several of these questions during my presentation. So what we normally had in table tennis is that coaches or scouts went to specific youth tournaments and observed the children during their matches. So we used the coach's eye as common practice to actually select or deselect children. The coach's eye might be a helpful tool for talent identification and perhaps even selection, because these are often expert trainers who know what is necessary to perform at the elite level. They have a lot of experiences and can provide a quick overview. Moreover, they can combine different characteristics of players and which are combined in a holistic approach. But there also are some dilemmas in here, because the coach might be not that objective and there is some subjectivity on his or her opinion. And the coach might have a sort of be like me approach, taking his or her own experience into account, maybe as an ex-international player, and only looking for such kind of profile. And what we also see is that the judgment of coaches or the experts can be biased, caused by differences in growth, maturity, relative age, training experience, both the quality and the quantity of the training, and competition experience. So it's not that easy to really have a good evaluation of a player done by a coach. If we go a little bit more into deep, I'd like to explain that to you. If we look at growth and maturation, that we see that children of the same age that actually compete with each other may differ tremendously considering growth and maturation, especially before puberty. Differences are most obvious. If you look at the pictures, on the one hand you see the girls that were standing on the podium during the Dutch national championships. And I hope you can see it, but the one that became first is in the middle position. And she is actually that high as the one that was in the second position, only she's standing like 20 or 30 centimeters lower than that girl. So there really is a difference between children regarding their standing height. And on the other hand, if you see the boy and the girl together on the picture, these are brother and sisters, and they're equally tall and weigh the same. However, the boy is 2 years older. So it's really difficult to have a good perspective or a good evaluation on a child regarding his growth and maturation, because that really can differ. In addition to that, we also have to do with the relative age. Children that are relatively older within their birth cohort or in their age category have better chances for better opportunities and less chance to drop out. This trend has been seen in many sports, which means that just after the cut-off date, if you have your birthday exactly then, like if the cut-off date would be the 1st of January and you're born just in January, then you're relatively older to the ones that are born in November or December. And that can make a difference for like 10 to 12 months, which can really have a huge difference between kids within a certain age period, especially when they're younger. And of course, we needed to check whether this is also relevant for table tennis. We did a study on the relative age in table tennis, and we included different populations. We looked at the world ranking list, the European ranking list, we looked at the French ranking list, and also in the Dutch. And I'm just showing you a part of it. I'd like to show you a graph which shows the birth distribution of the top 100 players for both the boys and girls for the junior and cadet age. If we look at these figures, what normally would take place is that in the first quartile after a cutoff date, in the second, in the third and the fourth, we would have a more or less equal birth distribution of 25% each. But what we see within the boys, in the juniors especially, is that there is an overrepresentation of the ones that are born in the first quartile. And if you look at the fourth quartile, you see that there is a clear underrepresentation. And the same trend is actually shown for the cadets. In the girls we see more or less the same, where the first semester is overrepresented compared to the second semester of the year, which is both in the juniors and also in the cadets. And then, besides growth and maturation and the relative age effect, of course there might be a difference between children regarding training and competition exposure. And we agree that quantity and quality of training and also the competition experience, that will influence the child's performance, but we actually do not know to what extent. So that's a difficult one. So we have some dilemmas here, and normally if we are going for a selection procedure, what will happen is this. We will have some prediction, and this is the choices that we make, and this is what actually will come out. And what we of course want is that we have the best selection ever, which means that we have all of them within the true positives or in the true negatives. That means that you're really good in predicting whether someone will make it to the top level or someone will not make it to the top level. But in practice, it seems that we also have a lot of false positives and false negatives in there, which means that we have a sort of investment loss actually. We invested in players that actually did not make it. And on the other hand, we might have lost some talents here. We wasted some talents that were not selected, but actually should have reached the highest level. So what we try to do within research, all the research that we're doing, is that we try to reduce that. So make the talent and investment loss and the talent waste as small as possible. So the Netherlands Table Tennis Association tried to think of the value of testing. And they thought, okay, if we can use tests to create a sport-specific motor profile, which is more objective and maybe even norm-based, then we could create a benchmark for talent identification and selection. And we might be able to reduce the bias of sports experience like training and competition. So from 1998, the Netherlands Table Tennis Association started with the National Talent Days for the under 11 kids. And these kids played a tournament during this day and also did some motor tests. And these motor tests were developed by expert trainers and intended to measure the underlying skills for table tennis. It was really important that these were non-trained tasks, so the experience within training and competition should be minimized. And of course, these tasks should be challenging for the kids and there should be a high feasibility for practice. And for that, those 4 tests were used for an observational study, and we looked at whether the 4th test had a predictive value for 2 things. First, the low or high performance. So we made 2 groups of the kids that actually did the test and looked at their later performance. And we had a cutoff where we said, okay, these were the high performance and these are the low performance. And then within the high performance group, we wanted to have an idea whether the test also could predict the competition score within the high performance group. What we saw is that we could make a model, and within the model, sprint and throwing a ball were significant predictors for the boys, and for the girls, sprint, speed while dribbling and throwing a ball were significant predictors. But if we looked at the model, we also saw that the accuracies were quite low, and you can imagine that it's really difficult to explain competition score many years later only based on 2 tests. For that, it was recommended to include more test items for eye-hand coordination, but we also said, okay, this should actually be part of a multidimensional profile and other domains should be included as well. So after this project, we started with a new project about developing new test items. And after that, an evaluation of the reproducibility and validity per test item. After that, we might have to revise some of the test items and do a re-evaluation. And we did an evaluation of the perceptor motor skills assessment as a whole. And we ended up with a reproducible assessment with good prospects for predictive validity. We published some of the studies which you can find in the scientific databases on the internet. So first, developing a new test item. So we started the development of a new eye-hand coordination test, in which children needed to throw a ball to a vertical position table tennis table and catch it again with the other hand, and try to do that as many times as possible within 30 seconds. Because we didn't know which protocol would be the best, we did the protocol at 1 meter distance from the table and at 2 meter distance of the table, and we used a table tennis ball, and also a tennis ball. So in the end we had 4 test protocols. As you can see here in the table, we had the tennis ball at 1 meter, tennis ball at 2 meter, table tennis 1 meter, and table tennis ball at 2 meter. And what we saw, if we compared players from national selection, regional selection, and local clubs, we saw that the test items really discriminated between the national, regional, and the local ones. So especially the lower group could be really easily discriminated from the others. What we also saw is that the reproducibility of the test items was rather good. And we chose to continue with the protocol with the table tennis ball at 1 meter distance because we thought that would be the most discriminating and best reproducible test item. Then we did an evaluation on the reproducibility and validity of all the test items, and together with the eye-hand coordination test, also 3 other test items were included, which meant that we had 8 test items at that point in time. So we had sprint agility, vertical jump, speed while dribbling, aiming at target, ball skills, throwing a ball, and the eye-hand coordination test that I showed you. And the first thing that we did, we evaluated them on the reproducibility. Within the reproducibility, actually all came out very good, except for the aiming at target and the ball skills. Second thing that we did is we did a factor analysis, and we wanted to know whether there were different constructs within the assessment battery that were assessed through these test items. And what we saw is that we had 3 items loading on one factor and 5 items on the other one. And we called this factor, the sprint agility and vertical jump, more the gross motor function. And we called the first factor, or the other factor with the 5 test items, the ball control factor. And finally, we also checked whether the 8 test items together had a significant relationship with the ranking at the moment that the kids were tested. But I must say that it was not intended to really have a high correlation, because then it would be the same as the current performance. So we were rather glad actually that the relationship with the national ranking was not that high. In boys you see a significant relation of 0.5, and in the girls you see a relation of 0.4. Which means that indeed perceptual motor skills assessment does measure a little bit different things than the performance itself. But we needed to revise 2 of the test items because of low reproducibility, and we needed to re-evaluate them. So what we did, we developed new test items for aiming at target and ball skills, and we took a test-retest design again to test for reproducibility outcomes. And what we saw is that indeed with the new test items we had reproducible test items with an ICC of more than 0.8. And we also of course wanted to know whether the test items were able to discriminate again between the children that were actually within the different player groups. And what we saw is that indeed there was a significant difference between the groups, and we see that the national did the best and the regional in between, and the locals actually performed worse for both aiming at target and also for ball skills. So now we had done a re-evaluation, and then of course we wanted to know whether the whole perceptual motor skills assessment could have a good predictive value in the end. So we now have 8 test items that were conducted during the National Talent Days, so all kids were tested. And we did a second evaluation. First we looked at the test-retest study, and included more than 50 kids in there. We saw that the ICC, the intercorrelation coefficient for the total score, which means all the items together, was above 0.9, and that we had a good, for that reason, a good reliability. We also saw that the smallest detectable difference and also the coefficient of variation were really okay and adequate for this kind of testing. Finally, the Chromebus Alpha showed a 0.8, which means that there was a good internal consistency of the test items, which means that they all contribute to the total score and that we really have a good construct in there. And then, of course, we wanted to know whether these test items also had a good or a better predictive value than the 4 test items and that we evaluated previously. But in this study we were only able to follow the children a couple of seasons, which meant that we only were able to do that for 2.5 years. And we had 2 questions there. The first one was, can the outcomes of the perceptor motor skills assessment predict future competition participation? And the other was about competition performance in young table tennis players. And what we found out is that for the first we found out that actually competition participation was not predicted, but we could explain competition performance, and we had a model with an explained variance of 51%, which is quite high for this kind of. So we ended up with an assessment battery with good reproducibility and good prospects for predictive validity. But we had one more question, because if training could actually influence performance, then it might also influence the test results. And we wanted to check that, whether that was true. And just a recent study, we tried to do that. So we did that for the boys and for the girls, and you see all the test items again. And we looked at whether there was a relation with the current training, with the training volume, and with the training quality, which was actually based on the trainer's license of the responsible trainer of the child. And what we saw, and we intended to have, of course, no relationship with the training outcomes, but we saw that speed while dribbling, aiming at target, eye-hand coordination in both the boys and the girls showed some relationship. However, the effect sizes were quite small. So what we concluded is that there was only a small transfer of skill, and there was a substantial amount of task specificity, which means that it seems to be okay to use the perceptor motor skills as part of talent identification. However, if there is really huge difference in the training of volume, then it should be taken into account to have a better or a fair interpretation of the estimation of potential. But there are also some new insights. A recent paper of Roland Zieklater and colleagues showed that actually combining measurements and the coach's eye might be even more beneficial than testing alone. And the other thing is that it's also good to look at the performance results itself and see how players develop over time, because adding this to your program might help you to have a better estimate in the end. So the take-home messages are: testing can help to better objectify potential. Tasks that are not trained seem to overcome the bias of training experience sufficiently. But include this in a multidimensional assessment to have a better estimate of potential and correct for other bias. And of course, science and technology are there to support practice. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope this presentation will inspire you for future work. Thank you very much.